I try and I don't fear failing.
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook presented by Details Interactive. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 23, and today's guest is Kara Goldin. Before we get started, a quick thank you as always to Max Brandstetter of the Wow Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at max@maxpodcasting.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Marketing Playbook podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kara Goldin. Kara is the founder and CEO of Hint Inc., best known for its award-winning Hint Water, the leading unsweetened flavored water, and the author of Undaunted. She's an active speaker and writer and hosts the podcast Unstoppable with Kara Goldin, where she interviews founders, entrepreneurs, and other disruptors across various industries. She lives in the Bay Area. Follow Kara on all social handles at Kara Goldin. Kara, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It's really great to be able to have somebody like yourself, entrepreneur of a consumer brand that I know, and I'm sure many of my listeners know, also somebody who is in the midst of getting a book out into the market. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to you today. We like to start the Marketing Playbook podcast with a little bit of a backstory, the first story of people, kind of where they grew up, siblings, parents, home life. Just quickly lay the land of what it was like growing up as Kara Goldin, and how maybe that positioned you for what you're doing now in your career.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's always easier to look in a rearview mirror and sort of like try and connect dots. But I grew up the last of 5 kids in Scottsdale, Arizona. My dad moved us from Minneapolis when I was a tiny little girl, and he didn't want to shovel snow anymore. So I think he literally took a finger to a map and figured out where he wouldn't have to do that. And yeah, I mean, I grew up in Scottsdale, and when there were less than 100,000 people there, and I always say I was a original settler there, not necessarily by choice, but loved growing up there and really, appreciate the outdoors, I think, today because of that. But my father was, I talk about him in my book as like a frustrated entrepreneur, that he founded a brand within a larger company called Armor Food Company, which ultimately they ended up selling this brand to ConAgra. It was a brand called Healthy Choice. And so he developed that. So, it's interesting because he really developed it. Growing up in our house was also my mother and, my 4 brothers and sisters. But my mom decided in her mid 40s that she wanted to change careers. She had been an art history major and done some stuff around art, and then decided what she really wanted to go into was fashion. And so at, mid 40s, which back then was it was a big decision, to do that. And so watching her, switch into what she ultimately wanted to do, and not to mention the fact that my dad being totally supportive, he just wanted a happy wife, and wanted to, make
Happy
sure
wife,
that,
happy life, right?
right. And so it was always, kind of a house of people kind of having passions and really doing what they ultimately wanted to do. And I think, all 5 of his kids, I think we'd all say today that the one thing that my dad instilled in us was we always had to play a sport. It was like part of the deal of being, my maiden name is Keenan, and it was always in the Keenan house. He couldn't care less what sport, but he was like, everybody needs to always be active and playing some kind of sport. And so, with that, I think learned a lot about teamwork, and appreciation for people that are maybe better than you at certain things, but also kind of setting goals for yourself along the way that just allow you to ultimately be the best that you can possibly be.
That's great. And the Arizona upbringing brought you to Arizona State journalism. I guess that based upon working at Time and CNN, you were thinking that you were going to be a journalist.
Well, I started out, yeah, I mean, I went to Arizona State primarily because it was in-state tuition, and I was there, and, it's I was, had a great time there in journalism, and something when I'm on college campuses I talk about a lot is that I really didn't understand finance when I was going to school at ASU, and I sort of feared it. Like, I just didn't really understand what a business plan was. And, again, I'm 18 years old and I thought, I don't really necessarily want to go into business. What I really liked to do was write. And I loved my kind of communications classes, and those were great. But I thought, if I can just go take some classes where some of my friends were, frankly, in the business school, then that would be great. And that's when I really decided I should take classes in things that I know nothing about. So I went to classes in finance. And, I bring this up on college campuses because I think it's like the perfect time to go and learn things is when you're actually in school, like even if it's not part of your major. I was speaking at UC Berkeley last year and probably upset a few people who were maybe seniors in engineering. I was speaking to an engineering class because I said, if you don't have appreciation for marketing or finance or other things besides engineering, then I've got news for you. You're never going to be the head of Facebook or Google, because at the end of the day, like, you've got to have an appreciation for those other pieces in order to actually go run a company. It's not to say that you can't be a terrific engineer or, I think it goes for every single thing that you end up learning in school. You really have to go and take classes in those things so then you can actually say, like, those things are important, not important. More than anything, try and figure out how to understand those things. So that's what I did. And when I was, there in finance, I, learned to read the Wall Street Journal and also Fortune magazine. And ultimately that's when, like, a light bulb went off in my head. I used to read Fortune and the Wall Street Journal religiously because it really challenged me to understand something that I just didn't have a comfort level with. And that's when I graduated. I decided my dream job was to go and work for Marshall Loeb at Fortune magazine. He wasn't coming on campus to interview, and instead I invested in a plane flight to go to New York and figure out how I was going to get a job there. So it's another crazy story that I'll leave for the book, but it's I never ended up getting a job at Fortune, but I did get a job in the building in at Time. And I look at today, everything that I know about e-commerce was really, one component of it was really the things that I learned there as I worked in circulation around subscription and lifetime value and lots of things that we talk about today. But, the magazine industry and maybe the credit card industry are the ones that really were talking about this stuff, back in the 80s and 90s, way before we even had e-commerce.
Yeah, I grew up in the catalog industry,
Yeah.
and that was also a place. And it's funny, as I moved into digital, just about everything, all the key metrics that you follow in a digital commerce business are ones that we followed in catalog or subscription, like you're talking about. Your comment about finance and accounting, also as a trained accountant, I've always believed, thankfully I got out of that very early in my career, but I've always believed that the way to best learn a business is through the accounting and the P&L statement of a business. And when I do a lot of mentoring and speaking, as you do, to younger people, even if you're not an accountant or you're not a financial major, force yourself to get into something, even if it's basic accounting, because there's nothing that you're going to do where that's not going to come up and be a requirement for you to understand the business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I also think, I know a ton of would-be entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs who have come from the finance side. And I think it's like having an understanding of marketing and storytelling and not just the financial metrics, because I think like, unfortunately, sometimes things are kind of hard to measure in some of these other areas, but they're important. And you look at brands that have been really built to stay. I feel like there's relevance in all these different arms and things that you should learn.
And you spent 7 years, I believe, at AOL. AOL was flying high. Is that pre or post merger acquisition with Time?
Oh, very pre. So I was there, yeah, 95. I mean, technically, like I think it was a little bit later, but AOL was actually an investor in a startup that I was working out that was actually the startup was called To Market and it originated inside of Apple. I never worked at Apple, but there were three guys that worked at Apple and on this idea that was actually an original idea of Steve Jobs. And they ultimately decided to spin it out into this company To Market from Apple. And then they were looking for an investor, and AOL came in and invested in this company. And anyway, I ended up joining them when I moved to San Francisco, end of 94, beginning of 95, and they were not even a year old at that point. And AOL, we were kind of working with AOL. They were trying to do some e-commerce, but really hadn't figured it out. They were starting a channel strategy. So they had, I don't know if you remember, but sports and news and shopping. And so they were kind of like, we were an investment, but they were, really excited about the progress that we had made, that I was leading around really signing up partners, including J. Crew and Omaha Steaks. And so that was what I had been responsible for. So they ultimately acquired us, they said, primarily for, those relationships that we had with the brands. And initially it was to bring really a two platform approach to a lot of these relationships. So not just having everybody on the CD that we had, but also on the online service. And then eventually, once internet speeds were a little bit more acceptable and downloading things, then we did away with the CD. But yeah, that's how I got to AOL. And then ultimately, as you mentioned, all my former companies rolled up into one. I was sort of in between my time at AOL and time I was at CNN. And so all those companies sort of rolled up into one. So I stayed on in a transition team for a year. And my husband, which was part of the reason why we moved to the Bay Area, he was at another one of the companies that was getting rolled up into that, Netscape. And so he was an intellectual property lawyer there. And so we both worked on the transition team and then ultimately decided we're done. We're out. We're like going to try and figure out what we want to do, including, starting our family. We had three kids at that point. That's kind of when the idea around Hint started, which was just trying to get myself healthier than I had been and paying more attention to what I was putting in my body and my family's body. And that was really what kind of, that's how the idea really came to fruition.
Right. So now you have this idea you want to get healthier. So what did you do? There's lots of different ways to get healthier. Where did you see a void in the market? What made it that it was around water and things for hydration?
Yeah. So, I mean, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur because very different than a lot of entrepreneurs I've talked to. I didn't sit there even watching my dad kind of be a frustrated entrepreneur, think, okay, one day I'm going to run my own company, or I have lots of ideas and I'm going to develop one of those. Instead, I wanted to, as you said, get healthier. And I didn't have like a diagnosis of being ill, but I had gained a bunch of weight over the course of having a bunch of kids. And also, my energy levels had just dropped significantly. And I had also developed terrible adult acne that I didn't even have as a kid. So, for me, I had again been an athlete growing up. I knew how to like train and work out, and I started running a lot again, and nothing was like working to get myself in shape. And so I started paying attention to what I was eating, just thinking if it's not the exercise, maybe it's what I'm putting into my body. And still kind of nothing, like everything seemed like I was fairly healthy on that front. But one day I was looking down at my diet soda, and saw like all these ingredients that I didn't even understand. And I never really paid attention because it said the word diet on it. So I assumed like it definitely was better for me. And that's when I really thought, okay, I'm going to put this to the side and start drinking water in exchange. And then I really thought about, gosh, why don't I drink more water? And, again, I'd grown up in Arizona. I should have been drinking a lot more, was an athlete. So I really should have been drinking a lot more. But I just kind of gave myself a pass to that diet soda. Like I thought, oh, it's fine. And then when I swapped it out for 2.5 weeks, and I ultimately lost over 20 pounds in 2.5 weeks, and my skin cleared, my energy levels were gone. I really started taking a close look at, how I not only had been fooled into believing that something was better for me, but how many other people have been fooled. And that for me was just, kind of this epiphany, and really the main reason why I started the company then. And what I believe today is that, it's really hard for consumers to actually get healthy today. And, for me, I was looking in San Francisco at my local Whole Foods and thinking, okay, if I shop at Whole Foods and work out, I'm going to be great. And the reality is that, it's not just about calories. It's not just about not eating certain things or drinking diet. It's really about paying attention to how your body reacts to different things. And in my case, it was diet sweeteners. And so when I really believed that I would be drinking more water if I had some kind of flavor in it, and I was shocked to see that the market 15 years ago was filled with things, not only were filled with some sort of sweetener in it, whether it was sugar or diet sweeteners, but also other things that were tricking the consumer. So vitamin water was out on the market then, but they didn't have even a diet version at that point. But vitamin water had more calories in it than a can of Coke. And I thought, wow, like there's people that are drinking this that actually think that it's better for them. And it just shocked me that like this are allowed, that they're even trademarked, right? Like it's just, it was really, really shocking. And again, hadn't been in the food and beverage industry, had been in the tech industry. And so I came at it with this lens of, gosh, if I could just not only help myself and help my family, but also help a lot of other people to kind of understand what I see, then that would be really great. And I didn't even know if it was a company. I remember when I was first starting, people said, gosh, that's so great that you started a company. And I'm like, is it a company? Like I have 3 SKUs. I'm not really sure. It's like I've worked at CNN and AOL, and I'm not really sure it's a company. And I was almost trying to convince myself that this was not a company, that it was just a few products that I was getting on the shelf at Whole Foods. And subtitle of my book is Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. I clearly had doubts as to whether or not I could do it or whether or not it was a company. But for me, it was really kind of a mission to see whether or not I could actually help people get healthier.
So, there's so much we could talk about. I could probably spend hours talking with you because it's so interesting of how you built this company, so-called company, I guess at the beginning. So once you knew that flavored water was going to be the place for you, how did you go about, really getting it started? Did you ultimately needed to get it produced for you? You needed to go through some, lots of tasting to make sure that it met, the requirements that you had. Give us a quick overview of how you put it together.
Yeah, so it really started in my kitchen, and first slicing up fruit, throwing it in water. And then what I realized that I was putting fruit into a big carafe and put it in my refrigerator. And after a couple of days, it would just sort of not taste very good. And so I thought, if there's a way to get rid of the pulp. Like that seemed to be the stuff that got nasty looking. I wonder if this would actually do better. And so I started playing with it, like trying to figure out what if I just put a peel in the water. And I mean, I was literally like throwing fruit on the stove and boiling out, the water and just trying to see like what I could get from the oils and essences of the fruit. And again, I had no idea what I was doing. And I think that this is the story too of so many entrepreneurs. And another reason why I wrote my book was, just to inspire people to just start trying and start playing. Because I think that so often we think like, oh, I've never been in the beverage industry, so I can't do it. And when you hear the stories of real entrepreneurs, it starts a very similar way. Maybe they weren't boiling down fruit on the stove, but they were just trying like these crazy ideas. And like they had no idea what they were doing, but they were just playing with it. And then, you have something to go on and maybe something to get better at. And if nothing else, you have I never burned the house down or anything like that. Like, you're able to kind of look back on those times as times when, you actually learned quite a bit. And you're right. I mean, when I started looking at how do I get this on the shelf, and Whole Foods was our first retailer in San Francisco, that's when I, was making batches in our kitchen, but basically decided to try and find a bottler. And the number of bottlers that, oh, what did you do before? Oh, like you didn't work at one of the beverage companies before? I mean, they just immediately wrote me off. Like, this person's a waste of time. They'll never actually do this. And finally, I found one that said they were based out of Chicago. They were a female founded company. And basically, I convinced her to run like a small batch for us. And I think like that's the thing too, that you're going to hear a lot of no's along the way, but then you'll find somebody that does it. It's a numbers game on pretty much everything that you do. And I think like that's the mindset. Like I don't know, I just had so much fun along the way. I would definitely have days that were bad days, right? And I would say, okay, I'm done for the day. Now I'm going to get back up, and start again, or maybe go in a little bit different direction. But I think also for me, I built a very successful business inside of AOL, and I felt like no one could ever take that away from me, right? And so now I was going and doing this like super crazy idea that I was just really passionate about, and passionate for all the right reasons, around health. And so I felt like even if it took me longer to do it, I was okay with that. And I think it's sort of another thing that, I've shared with a lot of entrepreneurs too, that I've always tried to figure out is here, as the youngest vice president at AOL and one of a few number of female vice presidents at AOL at the time. And I just felt like I want to go back to the bottom and learn. I mean, it's part of what I talk about in kind of building a culture too, that I always encourage our managers in our company to hire people that they're going to learn from. Because I think that for me at AOL, I got to a point where I was having to teach people who worked for me all the time. And after a while, like that gets old for everybody, right? Like every manager I've talked to, and, if you're not learning, then you get bored, right? And maybe you get bored of the company, but you have to be learning. And so, it's a question that I always pose to all of our managers. I'm like, what do they know that you don't know? Or what do they do better than you? Because I think that you have to have those people. You can still manage people who are better than you at certain things or who know more than you. It's a different thing. And so that's really what I learned. And when I look back on my time at AOL, that I think, I was just at a place where I had sort of risen to the top of where I wanted to be. And I wanted to go back to learn. So for me, like the beverage industry was super fascinating. And even though I got knocked down a few times, I also was like, no one can take away what I've built in this other industry. And now it's time for me to go and get my MBA in this industry and learn. So
That's great. That's great. I always try to find people, hire people around me that are smarter than I. I get bored very quickly, and being able to have people challenge you with things that I don't know what you're saying is a great point. How many flavors can we find of Hint these days?
like 25-ish. I mean, we do these things called smash ups that we do pretty much online only initially, and it's sort of a test of bringing two crazy flavors together. Our newest one that we just launched that is so good. Actually, I was just had a few bottles sitting on my desk right next to me, but blueberry lemon, and yeah, it's really good. And actually, those are two very complicated fruits to sort of deal with too, because they're lemon. You people would think like, oh, lemon, how hard could it be? But the reality is that, the essence, the zest that comes out of the lemon actually can turn very, very fast. So sometimes, people will try something lemony and it will like literally smell like turpentine, right? And if you let it sit for long enough, it could actually get that way too. But that I don't worry about in the hint product, but definitely the taste is something that, we've really tried to master, and it's a very sensitive fruit. And then also blueberries too is something that, because it's seasonal, there's certain times a year that they taste better than others. And we sometimes don't use just the blueberry, just as we use real fruit, which is not what, most companies and sort of the beverage industry use unless you're a juice company. But we oftentimes will use like grape skins in addition. It's all plant-based and fruits or vegetables that we're using in the product. But anyway, it's a flavor I'm really, really proud of.
The devil's in the details. You've probably heard that phrase time and time again in your professional life. Projects get started with great intentions, but you no longer have the time to pay attention to the little things that can make the difference between success and failure. At Details Interactive, you can discuss your business with a seasoned direct-to-consumer marketing executive who has helped launch and grow web businesses and integrate multi-channel marketing initiatives. Learn more at detailsinteractive.com. I think one of the things that's interesting in looking at your business online, you started, I think, in, a bottle, but then you migrated into boxes for kids and things. So product extension's important in a business like this?
Yeah, I think like the key thing that we kept hearing around the kids' boxes is that the age group that actually drinks out of kids' boxes is pretty limited, right? Like it's maybe by the time you get to be 7 or 8 years old, that's not your first choice. You want to grab a bottle and you want it reclosable. But there's this market that enters decision making around beverages before the bottle that is that under seven, that is really faced with limited choices that are good for you. I mean, they've got, the juice boxes and the Capri Suns. And I mean, it's just sugar, 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 sugar. And so the problem for us really is graduating those people to a better for you product that doesn't have the sweet in it. It was like for a long time, we thought, oh, that market's so small and so minimal and so limited. But if they're used to drinking sugar, right, at that age versus actually starting out on a product like Hint, then we have to convert those people. Like we have to convert their taste buds. And so that's how we thought about going into that market and kind of doing it in a packaging that is similar to what they're used to having.
And then you expanded into a sunscreen product as well. How did that come about?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting. We didn't think about going outside of beverage. Another sort of entrepreneurial story. Basically, sunscreen it all has to be FDA approved. And so, in order to get FDA approved, you need a company name. And so I used Hint's company name as a placeholder for getting the approval on the FDA. Again, in my own kitchen, like was just making my sunscreen. I had gotten some basal cell, not so great sun spots on my nose. And I finally thought, okay, I really need to start wearing sunscreen and be more serious about it. And that's when I really realized that the sunscreens that were in the market, I had an issue with them. Either they were zinc and ended up screwing up my foundation that I wear on my face, or they were itchy, or they smelled. I mean, I always like thought it was curious how sunscreen was either unscented or tropical. And that was it. Like, and I thought, I don't really want to wear tropical, especially if I'm going to be like going out for the afternoon or working or whatever and smell like I've just been at the beach. But a lot of these unscented sunscreens like stink. I mean, they just don't really have, they just don't have an interesting smell. And that's the other thing that I've learned about branding. And frankly, it's not just for products that you wear. I think it's also true for products that you drink or that you eat. In order to get kind of the stickiness and the consumer trust, I mean, it has to smell great. Like, even if it's a product that is really like something that you eat or something that you drink, that nose that you get right before you actually consume it is very, very important. And so, that I had, learned and sort of growing up with Hint, developing the product, but then really felt like if I can create a better sunscreen, but also that like smells better, that doesn't have oxybenzone and is just something that is definitely enjoyable to wear, then that would be awesome. And so we weren't sure how long that would actually take to get the FDA approval. It ended up taking like a year to get the approval. And then what I thought was so funny is we had more like beverage trade magazines and beverage executives that were, wait a minute, what's she doing? Like we saw that she's like doing a water and that doesn't have sweeteners in it, but now she's doing a sunscreen. And so frankly, we got like a lot of press off of it. And we kept thinking we'll just use the Hint name as a placeholder and then we'll see what happens. And then I don't know, people just like seem to think that that was like part of the strategy. And we thought, I don't know, just leave it for now. I mean, people are like having a discussion about it and everybody says it's a great sunscreen, but they just don't understand why a beverage company would go into the sunscreen industry. And then it's funny because we left it there. I mean, we launched it a couple of years ago. We left Hint on, and then we actually developed another product that I really wanted to disrupt the natural better for you deodorant industry because I didn't love the feel of a lot of these better for you deodorants. But I wanted to do away with aluminum. And it started again out of a health story around my dad had Alzheimer's and passed away 10 years ago. And I started looking at what is it that, incredibly creative, smart guy that was always like Mr. Ideas, like was gone when he got Alzheimer's. And so I started looking at, aluminum and the effects on the body and what a lot of doctors were saying. And obviously there's no cure for Alzheimer's, but I thought there's a lot of people that talk about aluminum. How do you do away with, coming in contact with aluminum? You don't drink out of cans. You might not use aluminum foil. I had never thought about antiperspirant and something that I did every single day. And so that's when I started seeing, gosh, can I find one? Can I make my own? Really kind of research this. And that's when I did it. And, I always share with people, I had sort of made a commitment to myself that if I still sweat or if I smelled, then I might go back. I wasn't like totally committed to it. But what I realized after my body got used to wearing the Hint deodorant after 2 months, I stopped sweating. Yeah, it was amazing. And now, I mean, it's so funny. I said the same thing to my husband and I have 4 teenagers, I'm like, don't just do it because of me. I mean, you make your own decisions. And I mean, it's funny. I have people when, we sell it primarily on our website and on Amazon. When we run out on Amazon, I mean, I have people texting me and saying, can I get like 5 of them? Like, I just, go crazy. And I've told so many people about it. I mean, people are obsessed with it. So I think once you have 3 categories, people start to say, oh, that's what these guys were doing. I mean, they're really around health and they start speaking about, these other products. The truth is that there was no big strategy. It sort of happened by accident. But the other piece of it is I feel like it has the halo effect, right? We
Yeah,
don't
I was
have,
just going to use the word halo effect. It's
yeah.
exactly right. Yeah.
And I think it builds trust for your brand. And so, I think when people start to they'll discover the deodorant and then they'll be like, oh yeah, I drink Hint too. But, now I'm going to drink it even more because you get me. Like you understand the things that I'm thinking about, whether it's sunscreen or deodorant, or we just last week actually launched a hand sanitizer that my frustration during COVID of trying to find a hand sanitizer that, wasn't rancid smelling or smelling like alcohol. It was just really frustrating. And I thought, okay, if we can actually use our essences to actually create a hand sanitizer, I don't think that is going away for people anytime soon. So it's amazing. Now we have to figure out how we can make enough of it.
Yeah,
Is because
you
people,
and a lot of others. Yeah.
yeah, it's been crazy. We barely put it on our website. And I mean, it's been selling out. It's been insane.
Great. So let's get to the book. We've talked so much about hint, which is so interesting. I want to make sure we leave time for the book. So the book is
Yeah.
called Undaunted: Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. You've touched on a little bit of this already, but quickly, why write it? What was the story that you were trying to tell everybody?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I had tons of doubts and definitely some doubters along the way too, and fears and failures. And what I realized in kind of speaking about building the brand over the years, when, there's always the Q&A at the end of these sessions that I speak at, and people would stand up and almost apologize saying that I was so different, that I didn't have fears, or I had never failed along the way, or didn't doubt myself like they were. And I think somewhere along the way, I blurted out that actually that's not true. We're actually the same. The difference between me and you is that I try and I don't fear failing. I actually don't sit there and allow failure to be this thing that prevents me from trying. And so every time I would say this, I would really see people think, wow, that's really interesting. That is something that I do. Or, I'll ask people, like, I'll say, like, should I quit my job and go start this? And I always say, like, you'll never get a straight answer, especially out of like the people you love, right? They'll say, nah, you shouldn't do it. Like, they don't want you to take risk, right? Or whatever it is. So I thought, if I could actually write my stories down and let people know through my own stories that it's okay, right? You can go and do things. You can get into Starbucks and get kicked out of Starbucks and still land on your feet, right? You've got, I mean, there's so many stories in there. And in addition, I felt like over the last few years, entrepreneurism has been overly glamorized. I always say to entrepreneurs that are thinking, or would be entrepreneurs, that there's ways easier ways to make money and work less hours than working in a startup or being a entrepreneur. And I feel like people really need to know those stories. And so I don't know if you know Guy Kawasaki, who was
Yeah, yeah,
early.
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
When Guy read my, a preview of my book, I mean, it was funny. He called me and he said, I got one question to ask you before, I tell you whether or not I'm going to do a blurb for your book. And I said, what's that? And he said, who in the world would be an entrepreneur after they read your book? And I started laughing and I was like, assuming that that was his way of getting out of doing the blurb. And I said, I think a lot of people would, because, I'm still standing and smiling and I've built a big company. I'm just being honest and sort of sharing with people that it takes a lot of resilience and you just got to keep going. And he said, and that is what I loved about this book. He said, it is the most honest entrepreneurial book where it's a choice. The fact that you did lots of things along the way that you're not supposed to be able to do. You're a female entrepreneur who's raised a lot of money. You have built a company going up against two giants in an industry where, you did things differently, including brought in, 55% of our business is direct to consumer. That's not what beverage companies do today. So I think like that is the thing that I really wanted to instill in people, that, through my own stories, if they read these, then they will understand, and hopefully it will make them be inspired enough to go and say, gosh, if she can do it, I can go do these things as well. And it's not a I mean, it's interesting. One person read the book. It was like a reviewer who I think went in not really understanding an entrepreneur's mindset and said, you don't actually tell me in the book at the end of every chapter, these are the things that I should have learned. And these are the things that you have to do in order to start a company. And I wrote back to the person. I said, no great entrepreneur, they might ask you, what are the three things I need to do? But no great entrepreneur or great entrepreneurial company would actually say that somebody actually gave them the directions, right? Like it just doesn't happen. I mean, there's like, no matter what the industry is, the greatest stories are the ones that are really done by trying, and they didn't have the roadmap, and they found the white space, and and they went the wrong direction, and then they recovered and went back the other direction, or they went the wrong direction and then it ended up to be the right direction. I mean, right, those are the stories. And so this is not a prescriptive self-help book. I mean, this is a book that actually shares the story of building a company that is here to stay.
That's incredible. So when you were all done, was it cathartic, that you put all of this down on a piece of paper? Did it help you with your own reason for doing the business and continuing to move on? Was that helpful to you?
It's funny. There's two ways to write a book. I figured out. Nobody, like, I know a ton of authors and I would ask them, but none of it really made sense until I actually did it on my own. But there's two ways to write a book. One is to actually have maybe a publisher or have a clear idea of where you want to go with your topic. The other is how I did it, which was basically journaling and journaling stories that people would maybe respond to in somewhat of a shocking educational way along the way, that I started just really writing. And again, I was traveling so much that I figured, I have time to write. And I'm in hotel rooms where I'm like, instead of watching TV, I'd just sit there and start writing these things down. And I had no idea where it was going to go, including the title. I mean, I just kept writing. And I'm really happy I did, because when I ultimately went out to get this book published, I had publishers who were saying, I want you to write a prescriptive, here's how entrepreneurs do it, 1, 2, 3. And I thought, no, I really want to do a book that shares stories. And I'm part of an organization called YPO. And I think, one thing that I always talk about that I'm really grateful for that I learned in YPO and Forum is that you're not there to solve someone else's problem. In Forum, you're actually there to sort of share your stories where the individual can solve their own problems, but based on you telling a story that might really trigger them to think, okay, I get it. Maybe this is how I should do it. And that's really kind of the mindset, and how I think that the best leaders think, is that they don't expect people to solve their problems. They really want to learn through other people's experiences.
Right. So we're getting to the end of our show here. So remind everybody about the date that the book is coming out.
Yeah, it's coming out October 20th. Very, very exciting. And you can find it at undauntedthebook.com, or it's on Amazon as well. Yeah, and definitely reach out to me on social at Kara Goldin. I'm really excited. And what I do with everything else that we're doing with Hint is, my hope is really just to help people.
Well, that's great. I'm going to head over to Whole Foods sometime later and get some blueberry lemon. And if I can't find it there, I will go to the website and buy
Exactly.
it. So that's great. Well, look, Kara, this was great. I really enjoyed the conversation. Love your brand. Love the stuff that you're doing, and I think the galleys that I read of the book are fantastic. I'm sure the full book is going to be even better. So, congratulations, and thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Kara Goldin for coming on the Marketing Playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1, Kara spoke of her appreciation for people that were better than her in certain aspects of their lives. We can learn from everyone, and setting goals is an important part of being able to improve. Set some stretch goals for yourself or others on your team, and create reasonable performance metrics to measure achievements. Number 2, do not underestimate how important it is to have some financial background. Even if that's not a core strength, any business person needs some basic understanding of financial statements and marketing. And number 3, so often we hear that a business was started because the founder had a crazy idea. Kara simply wanted to get healthy, and from that she built Hint. She heard a lot of no's along the way, but because she was not afraid of failure, she was able to create a thriving business. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at Details Interact and learn more at detailsinteractive.com. Until next time, the devil is in the details.